To me, Khabib is one of the scariest. He's not only beating you now, he's breaking you mentally. For me, he's the scariest one, pound for pound.
He the guy that you would come back for?
I would have. Nah, it's all over now.
You're done?
I'm done. It's three years ago. I wanted to come back for Khabib.
Ever since Georges St-Pierre hung up his gloves, fans have begged to know why the biggest fight in MMA history, GSP versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, never happened. Today, GSP finally breaks his silence and pulls back the curtain. He explains that both he and Khabib were ready to step into the octagon, that the idea sparked excitement from every corner of the MMA world, and that even Dana White dipped into negotiations. But when push came to shove, the UFC brass quietly decided another route made more sense for their business. In this video, you will hear GSP's side of the story, from how the UFC approached him first, to the clever but misleading tactics used behind the scenes, and to the gut-wrenching moment he realized the fight was never going to materialize.
Georges, greatest competitor in UFC of all time. It's my opinion. Even if we fight, I think it's gonna be very tough matchup for me, and I think for him too. Because I never lose round in UFC.
You'll learn why GSP still believes he could have beaten Khabib, what game plan he would have used, and how Khabib himself viewed the matchup as the ultimate legacy test. And finally, you'll see how GSP made peace with closing that chapter of his life, turning a dream fight into one of the sport's greatest what-ifs. Not long after GSP stepped away from competition, both he and Khabib reached out to the UFC to propose a super fight. Georges says that a year after retirement, he and Khabib showed up ready to go, training, focused, and fully on board. They imagined a clash that would electrify fight fans everywhere, a true passing of the torch between two legends. Yet despite all the hype, the UFC quietly declined.
So,
Are you good?
good luck for your fight.
Thank you, man. It's the same for you, man. You're the best, man.
I know this never gonna happen, but honestly, it's like if I have chance fight with someone, I'm gonna pick GSP.
It was the fight that would get me to come back for, because you have a lot to lose, but a lot to win too.
Georges recalls how he got a call from Dana White, who asked, "Would you be interested in facing Khabib?" That question seemed promising at first. GSP admits he was curious, asked for time to think, and expected to hear Khabib was on the same page. Instead, he soon realized the company never properly cleared Khabib first. For fans who dreamed of seeing striking genius collide with relentless wrestling, the answer was heartbreak. The UFC simply did not want that fight to happen, no matter how much both fighters wanted it. The reason the UFC gave for shelving the dream fight boils down to simple math and risk. In pure business terms, keeping Khabib champion and active looked like a safer bet than banking on a one-off comeback by GSP. UFC executives weighed the numbers and figured that Khabib's winning streak and star power would sustain viewership more consistently than a single blockbuster event.
I've got some... I was going to bring him on.
It's crazy. This guy was my father's favorite fighter. It's like I grew up watching his fights. It's honor stay with him here.
They knew that if GSP returned for one fight, it might draw huge pay-per-view buys. But after that, what would come next? Instead, the UFC opted to build divisions around other top contenders, keeping Khabib busy in title defenses. Georges understood their point of view. From their perspective, it was a way to keep the ball rolling. Still, he felt frustrated, believing that the super fight would have been worth any risk. In the end, business strategy outweighed the fans' fantasy of pitting two of the sport's all-time greats against each other. For GSP, there was only one fight worth ending his retirement: Khabib Nurmagomedov. He made this clear from the start. Even as he settled into life after fighting, commentating, spending time with family, and enjoying a slower pace, he kept one eye on the possibility of squaring off with the undefeated Eagle.
Khabib would have gone up to 170 pounds if you guys would have fought.
I think it would be either 170 or a meet in the middle, because I'm not a big welterweight. I weigh around 183 pounds. I never lost a lot of weight. I'm very wide, my shoulders are wide, but I'm not very thick.
Ask him how big he gets.
He's 200. The most welterweight are 200 pounds.
He says he expected Khabib to call him out on live broadcast, to hand the microphone to him after a win and say, "Where you at, GSP?" That moment almost came after Khabib's last fight, but instead of a dramatic challenge, Khabib retired mid-mic. Georges had felt a mix of relief and disappointment at that split second. He knew the only thing that could pull him back into a training camp was a chance to battle Khabib. In his mind, no cast, no return. For a man who conquered 2 weight classes and cemented his legacy, that singular itch to test himself against Khabib was irresistible, even if it meant the end of his peaceful retirement. Behind the scenes, the chess match between Dana White and the fighters played out in surprising ways. George reveals that Dana approached him first, suggesting the idea of the super fight and hinting that Khabib had already agreed. In reality, George says, the UFC hadn't even talked to Khabib yet. It was a classic promotional move. Plant the seed with one fighter, stoke the rumor mill, and see how much buzz it generates.
Because for a fighter, the scariest thing sometimes is the most exciting thing to do, and it's a problem that never been solved before.
After all, when whispers of GSP versus Khabib circulate, every fight fan leans in. But when George asked for clarity, he got vague answers and shifting timelines. Dana would say he was working on it, but never share specifics. George realized it was all for show, an attempt to fuel excitement without actually committing. This kind of game playing is common in big business, but it left GSP feeling used. He respects Dana and the UFC, but he also sees this ruse as a clear sign the fight was never truly on the table. Despite the politics, George never lost sight of how formidable Khabib really is. He calls Khabib one of the scariest pound-for-pound athletes he's ever seen, not just because of his takedowns, but because of the way he breaks you mentally.
And I think I can give him very tough match, you know. I know you guys love him, but when cage close, I have to smash my opponents, you know.
In the cage, Khabib's relentless pressure and chain wrestling can crush an opponent's spirit even when they land big strikes. Georges admires that mental edge and admits it would have been a huge challenge. He says that facing Khabib would have been like solving a complex puzzle, one that nobody had ever beaten. That respect runs deep. GSP compares Khabib's wrestling to an unbreakable fortress on the fence, where most fighters crumble under the weight of transitions and constant pressure. Yet George believes that challenge is exactly what real champions live for. He never looked at Khabib as unbeatable. He saw him as the ultimate test of all his years of training. When talking about strategy, George breaks down the game plan he would have used to neutralize Khabib's famed wrestling. He says he would take the center of the octagon and dictate the pace from the start, using sharp fakes and explosive timing to score takedowns on his own terms. He calls this approach proactive and reactive wrestling, mixing baited counters with sudden level changes to surprise a charging opponent.
And you know, it's my pleasure, brother.
There you go. For the man from the Hall of Fame, Georges St-Pierre.
By keeping the fight in the middle of the cage and avoiding being pinned on the fence, George believes he could force Khabib into a striking battle. His karate background, he explains, gives him an edge in conditioned takedowns that don't drain energy like traditional wrestling. While many fighters feared Khabib's chains, George would have danced around them, launching precise attacks when Khabib overcommitted. It's a high-risk plan, sure, but George thrives on that kind of fight IQ and adaptability, believing he could have turned the tables on the Dagestani Eagle. On the flip side, Khabib Nurmagomedov also spoke about the idea of facing Georges St-Pierre, painting it as a moment that would define his legacy. Khabib saw the matchup as an opportunity to prove himself against a legend who dominated 2 weight classes. He even floated the idea of fighting in New York, where the bright lights and roaring crowd would amplify the stakes. In interviews, Khabib chose GSP over Conor McGregor as the greatest athlete he wanted to beat, emphasizing how meaningful that victory would be. For Khabib, it wasn't about the money, it was about securing an immortal place in MMA history. He knew that conquering GSP would showcase his blend of wrestling genius, mental toughness, and unyielding drive. To Khabib, every fight is a chance to test his limits, but beating Georges St-Pierre would have been the pinnacle challenge. A challenge he was ready to accept with open arms. Both fighters consistently highlighted legacy over money when discussing the proposed super fight. George admitted he'd walk away from every dollar on the table if it meant proving he could beat Khabib. Likewise, Khabib stressed that legacy is the only currency that matters to a true champion. They agreed that defeating the other would etch their names indelibly in the sport's history books. This shared mindset shows why fans still dream about the matchup. 2 men who value greatness above all else. Even top fighters like Kamaru Usman chimed in, marveling at Khabib's relentless cage pressure and mental fortitude. Usman described fights against Khabib as waves that build slowly until you can't stay afloat, highlighting why opponents crack one by one. That sense of respect and awe underscores how special the super fight could have been, pitting the best striker-wrestler fusion against the most fearsome grappler the game has ever seen. Kamaru Usman, former champion and training partner to Georges, offered his own take on Khabib's unique dangers. He emphasized that Khabib's style isn't about one big move, it's a gradual suffocation. Even when an opponent lands clean shots, Khabib keeps coming forward, chipping away at your defenses until you crack mentally or physically. Usman pointed out that once Khabib gets you against the fence, his chain wrestling becomes a relentless machine, transitioning seamlessly between takedowns, pinning, and ground and pound. This slow burn pressure test is what separates Khabib from others. Usman said that many of Khabib's opponents felt overwhelmed by the constant threat, not just the actual slams. This insight helps explain why Georges' strategy of center cage control and explosive counters makes so much sense. Both fighters agree that beating Khabib would require a bold plan and nerves of steel. In the end, Georges St-Pierre has made peace with the fact that the super fight will likely remain a fantasy. Bound by retirement and UFC exclusivity, he acknowledges he's closed that chapter of his life. He has stepped away from the constant grind of training camps and fight nights, focusing instead on business, family, and finding new challenges outside the cage. Georges admits it still stings to think about how close he came, but he's thankful for the journey he had and the legacy he built. He knows fans will forever wonder what if, and he's proud that the idea of GSP versus Khabib lives on as one of MMA's greatest what could have been stories. By sharing his side of the tale, he gives fans a rare glimpse into the complicated mix of sport, business, and heart that defines the fight game, and leaves us all dreaming of that one last dance that never took place.